Ladies and gentlemen, dear students, dear representatives of academic community in Croatia and other guests, welcome to this session. My name is Krešo Perica, I'm Country General Manager of IBM Croatia, and I have a great pleasure and privilege to introduce Mr. Randalla MacDonald, who is IBM Senior Vice President for Human Resources. In the country where we do not develop technology, we do not produce computers, we do not do many of those things, the main asset of our country is the skills and knowledge of our people. Therefore, I don't think that there is any better person who can tell us how to build a sustainable, successful company and the economy by using and developing the most important resource, which is people. So without further delaying, I invite Mr. Randalla MacDonald to give us his lecture. How IBM did in the last 100 years that we are successfully dealing with not just IT, but in the global market. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be in Croatia. I hope my English is helpful to you because I speak no Croatian whatsoever. In fact, I'm impressed. I landed yesterday and one of the drivers was telling me that he learned all of his English by watching US TV programs, and I found his English better than my English, so it's very, very impressive. Your country is beautiful. I am only here for a day. I was in Spain yesterday, Croatia today, Italy tomorrow, Portugal on Thursday, and then I return home to the United States on Friday. So it's been a very busy trip. Perhaps someday I will come back and be able to spend some time here. One of the things that I want to talk about today is our 100 years. We are celebrating our 100-year anniversary, or if you will, our birthday. We were born 100 years ago, and today we make computers and software and we provide technical services to our clients. But it's interesting, and I think there's a lot of parallel that can be drawn between IBM and your country. While your country is much older than IBM in its history, it has gone through dramatic change over that history, and so is IBM. I think most of you would be surprised to learn that IBM originally started to make cheese slicers. We were slicing cheese, or scales to weigh people or to weigh meat. And here today we are probably making some of the most sophisticated computers in the world and writing software that is beyond anyone's imagination. And what created all of that was fundamentally something in our culture that said we had to continue to transform ourselves. We had to be able to see the future before everyone else. And that's how we believe that our 100 years have been successful. We find three things that are important in the company to continue to transform. First, you have to pay attention to the world economy. Your organization has to shift as the economy shifts. I'll come back to that in a minute. Secondly, you have to keep pace with technology. If you miss a generation of technology, you fundamentally fall so far behind that you can't catch up, which has happened to many technological companies. And last but not least, and this is something that I will dwell on a great deal, is that you have to have a common set of beliefs, of values. That is fundamentally how we think we survived over the last 100 years. As we think about, in present day, as we think about going back to the first point, the shift in economy, if you think about it, IBM was founded in a small town in New York State, upstate, up in the northern part of the United States, Endicott, New York. Very, very small. Much, much smaller than the city itself. And again, as I said, we were making scales and cheese slicers. And then they began to expand out into the United States. But our founders, the Watsons, understood one thing. They began to understand that for a company to be successful, it had to go beyond the United States. And it ultimately created a multinational company. And what they did is they fundamentally took IBM in the United States and began moving it to various countries all over the world and just made mini IBMs. We all looked alike, whether it be in England, whether it be in France, Italy, more of the more mature countries at the time. And they created this multinational company because they began to see the world economy beginning to move in that fashion. Of course, wars and like that had some impact on those economies over time. But let's fast forward it to right now. We saw, another reason why we transformed ourselves, we saw yet another growth beginning to occur. That growth, by the way, was even here. We began to see it in the Eastern Bloc countries, we began to see it in South America, we began to see it in Asia Pacific. China, for instance, is enormous growth. And what we began to say is that we needed to shift again our organization to be reflective of that world economy. And to give you some sense of it, there are more people working for IBM outside of the United States than there is in the United States, which 20 years ago that would not have been the case. We have thousands and thousands of people in India, we have thousands and thousands of people in China, and Brazil, and other countries, Russia. So we began to see how the world economy continues to grow, and we had to be responsive to that. There are several companies that have not moved as quickly as we have. We now have, by the way, over $100 billion worth of revenue. And we would expect that to continue to grow probably at a pace of about 7 to 8% over the next 5 years. So you can see why we can continue to survive, because we pay attention to what the economy is doing. Secondly, how we use technology. As I stand here, I can just feel my BlackBerry go off again. No matter where I am in the world, somebody can always find me. And we have begun to use technology in the workplace differently. 42% of the 450,000 people that we have working in IBM, 42% of them do not work at an IBM location. They work at a customer location, they work at home, they work at remote sites. We continuously use technology to improve our own efficiency and our own productivity. So the ability to see how technology can be used in the workplace has an enormous impact as well. It also has enormous impact for our clients, because as we deploy technology to the clients, they grow. And this is an important fact, is as the clients grow, the IBM company grows. We do not think necessarily about us growing. Our view of it is if we can get the clients to grow, we will automatically just follow that. Most people in corporations begin to think about it in terms of us and not the clients. So the shift in technology also, in our mind, represents an opportunity for some degree of world peace. We ultimately believe it brings the world and makes it smaller. It makes it a smarter planet, is what we fundamentally have been saying. We think about electrical grids differently. We think about transportation problems differently. We think about crimes differently, because we're using technology to predict what could happen to an electrical grid. We're using technology to predict perhaps what the traffic patterns will be on a given day. And in doing that, we use analytics to make decisions. So suddenly we're moving our company from the cheese slicer to the technology. Now we're even making a bigger bet on how we will analyze data. There's an enormous amount of data that's available in the world. And it just sits there. And sometimes the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand, and vice versa. And what we're trying to do is to bring them together to say, if we get that type of data, what could be the impact for humanity? Let me give you a specific example. We built a computer recently, $5 billion it cost us to build. It was called Watson. And it was used in the United States on a game show to show that we could ultimately beat the human brain. And we did. We actually beat the human brain. And nobody thought that was possible. And everybody thought that, well, why would IBM spend $5 billion on a computer just to beat the human brain? That's not what we're doing for it. This is again how technology makes you transform. Our belief is that that computer will ultimately help solve many of the most significant health problems in the world. Let me give you two examples. There was a woman in Boston, Massachusetts, who had a very rare disease. And she went to a number of physicians, a number of doctors trying to figure out what was wrong, and nobody could figure it out. Ultimately, a doctor, 7 months later, diagnosed the disease. Very rare. God willing, she still is alive today. That's the good news. But it took him 7 months to diagnose that disease. That doctor was brought down to our research laboratories in Yorktown, New York, and he took all of his journals and he inputted it into the computer. And it took him several hours to do that. And then he finally hit the send button. 3 seconds later, the computer made the diagnosis. So we took a human being took 7 months to figure it out. A computer took 3 seconds to figure it out. We expect that same second example of how technology will be used to transform the world. This is all about reinventing ourselves over and over again. And I'm going to talk to you about how I think that impacts your country in reinventing yourself. That same computer we expect to have, for instance, in heart surgery. And a doctor will be there with a microphone in front of him as he is operating on the human heart. And he will be describing what he's doing and what he is seeing. That computer will be absorbing that data and will be predicting before it happens what he should be expecting in the way of how the heart will react. They'll see certain symptoms, or they'll see certain trends that ultimately will allow him to make decisions before it happens. So when you think about reinventing yourself, you need to think about how technology, for instance in Croatia, comes into play. How do you take your country and rise it to a new level, a new standard? And technology will be an integral part of that. I am impressed with the university. I'm impressed with the graduates. I was briefed before by the dean and his team about what you do here in the engineering area. The curriculum is very, very strong, very high standards. We in IBM have been very happy to recruit a number of people from the university. You may be happy to know that some of those technologists that we recruited here are elsewhere in the world. There's about 20 or 30 graduates from this university who are elsewhere in the world helping us build our technology. The reason why I use that as an example, it goes back to this reinventing. This is not a US statement. This is not an English statement. This is not a Chinese statement. This is a world statement. We look for the very best people to help us focus on where the economies of the world are going and how technology will become an influencer on that. Talent becomes an important ingredient to our success. Within that talent, the third feature is to have a sense of core beliefs, a set of core values, a set of integrity and ethics that people subscribe to. One thing that, and I know that you have read and perhaps even experienced corruption around the world. When you have 425,000 people, you will always have somebody who may define what a gift is versus a bribe. You go to China, what I would consider a bribe in the United States is considered a gift in China. But we have defined our corporation differently. We have fundamentally said that we stand for certain things, and we have said that for 100 years. Why we have changed with the economy, and why we have changed our technology, we have one foundation piece. Three fundamental beliefs, if you will. The first one was a value that said we are dedicated to the client's success. Notice what I said, dedicated to the client's success, not to IBM's success. I've said this before. The reason for it is, our belief is if we can understand their business problems, understand where they're going, whether it be a bank, a telecommunications company, an industrial company, or the government. If we can decide what the vision of that company is, or country is, we can help them move forward. They become successful. Perhaps we can move Croatia forward. If Croatia becomes successful, we become successful. So that's why we are maniacally focused on what does the client want and what can we do to move that client forward. First value. The second value is an issue around innovation. I think that's IBM's biggest single strength. We create an environment where innovation is not just for IBM, we say, it is for society. The two examples that I gave you off of that computer are how we are improving society. We create labs all over the world. Perhaps 20 years ago we might have had 4 or 5 labs, predominantly in the United States, maybe in the UK. We now have 18 labs around the world, in China, India, Eastern Europe, and elsewhere. South America, we just opened our biggest in South America and Brazil. The reason for that is that we believe in order to stay ahead of the competition and make sure we're focused on the client, we've got to create innovation. We've got to have a climate where people are comfortable, truly comfortable, in being creative and breakthrough thinking. Not afraid to raise an issue that perhaps isn't a good idea or is a good idea. We have to create that climate in which people are willing to share ideas. Yesterday I was in Spain and they were giving me a briefing on their business, and I asked a simple question. And their first reaction was, no, we couldn't do that. And then they thought about it for a minute and they said, well, we couldn't do it that way, but we could do it this way. And then we sat there, a bunch of us, and began to take the idea and to just build on it. That's what makes an IBM corporation so powerful, is that it's in our DNA. It's the way we think, it's the way we act, it's the way we get excited, it's the way we turn people on to creating fresh thoughts about what needs to be done. And so creating that climate and that culture is something that we have worked on very, very hard. I mean, if you think about it as a proof point, you know, in theory, we could still be making cheese slicers and scales 100 years later. Some people have made businesses of that. But we don't make cheese slicers and scales anymore. We make some of the most sophisticated technology in the world because of innovation. That's what we look for, by the way, in our talent. If you were to interview with us, it wouldn't be the traditional question about, you know, how well did you do in school, what kind of courses did you have. It's more about questions about how do you think? Can you be a thought leader? Give us a creative idea that you've done in the past. What is your vision of what is possible in the future? That's the type of people that we like to attract, because those types of people continue to reinvent the IBM Corporation. And the third value that we have is something that is probably the most fundamental piece of IBM. And that's the value of trust and personal responsibility. We start with the premise, if you become an IBMer, or anybody becomes an IBMer, or us who are here as IBMers, we have a fundamental belief that we should trust each other. I trust people to do the right thing for the human resources of the IBM Corporation. The people who I instill that trust in have to take personal responsibility because I've given them that trust, that accountability. We do not tolerate, by any stretch of the imagination, any violation of a sense of integrity or ethic. We will not tolerate that. We had a situation several years ago where a very senior person did something that was fundamentally wrong. And we decided that he did it on a Friday, and by Monday, that very senior person was no longer working in IBM. You have to make a statement. And as young people, you need to have to come to grips with the fact that one of the things that you bring to employers, that you bring to society, is your level of ethic and your level of integrity. It is a direct reflection on your name, on your personal being, and on the company that you work for. And we have reinforced that over the last 100 years. What we think is significant about the last 100 years is that that has been the one common bond that we all seem to share. We treat each other with respect, we trust each other, and we have personal accountability. We're all different. I have my IBM colleagues here from Croatia, I'm from the United States, some from Germany, some from elsewhere. But we have one thing in common. We are IBMers. And IBMers stand for things. They stand for the client, they stand for innovation, and they stand for an ethic and a value system. So where does all this go? Well, one of the things that we think about is it's nice to kind of celebrate the past, the last 100 years, and it's important to understand where you are today, but more importantly, it's where do you go tomorrow? We're all about tomorrow. We're not about the past, a little bit about the current, but it's all about tomorrow. And we think the future is very, very bright. We think the future is very bright for a country like Croatia. While you are small in the scheme of the IBM company, we see the opportunities as your culture and as your country continues to evolve, as you begin to make statements about what you can do in the world. You look at this university, I think you said 62,000 students? 62,000 students, of which 4,500 are in the engineering school, plus or minus. That's a huge statement. That fundamentally says that there's talent available here. Because let me give you a comparison. We do not have that talent. I may be a US citizen, but I'm a global executive. We don't have that kind of talent in the United States today. We are not graduating enough mathematicians. We're not graduating enough computer technicians. We are not graduating enough electrical and mechanical engineers. So if you're me, and you begin to think about where technology is going, and you need creative breakthrough talent, you have to begin to look around the world to see where it is. You might say, well, why did you come to Croatia? Maybe you can answer that question yourselves. Maybe you are that talent for the future. We talk about it in concepts of think future. I'm already beginning to think about what the workplace looks like in 10 to 20 to 30 years from now, not next year. And I need people like you who will be in that workplace 10 to 20 to 30 years from now. For instance, one of the things you may be aware of in companies is that you have a performance management system. We call it PBC, where you sit down at the end of the year and you look at your objectives versus how did you do. You make that comparison and you get a rating. Once a year, your supervisor is supposed to sit down and tell you, this is what you did well, this is what you didn't do so well. Of course, we encourage people to do that during the course of the year as well. Guess what? I think in 10 years, that's all gone. I don't think you'll have what we call a PBC system. I think you'll take something like a BlackBerry or an iPad or whatever it may be, and you're going to look. You're going to wake up in the morning, and people will use the blog, if you will, to evaluate your performance the previous day. Anybody who you have interacted with will create something on here that fundamentally says, this is how I felt about Jane, or this is how I felt about John and their performance that day. You will get instantaneous performance feedback. That's how we think technology changes the workplace. We also think, for instance, that the concept of predictive analytics. Instead of people like me designing compensation programs and benefit programs and talent programs that we think will work, we will design the programs and then we'll use the technology, the predictive analytics technology, to tell us will it work. Think about going into a course or an employer and saying, you want to do this idea, I will tell you whether or not the market will buy your product. Most of us know a bicycle is 2 wheels, and there's other things like that. Suppose somebody came up with a bike that had 6 wheels. Sounds pretty innovative, pretty creative. Maybe you could even engineer it that way, right? Question is, will somebody buy it? Why do you build things if there's no market for it? And so when we think about the future, we think about taking technology and predicting in advance what the company should be working on. If something is already perfected, how do you make it even better? And more importantly, will it sell in the market? So when you think about companies reinventing themselves, think about IBM. Because while we could be very comfortable with what we had accomplished over the last 100 years, we're more interested in what we can accomplish over the next 100 years. And that's where perhaps some of you fit, some of us, all of us fit. I think this is a very unique moment in the world. In some ways, the world is getting smaller and smaller. That is because of the media, social networks, the technology that we have. When we think about what is possible, we begin to think about how IBM can use that as a foundation to lead in the next 100 years. And it's people like yourselves, who, by the way, I think technology will do us very well in the next 100 years. My guess is that all of us won't be here in 100 years. I mean, it's possible some of you are a lot younger than I can assure you. But my guess is that life expectancy won't still be 100. It'll be something less than that, but it'll probably increase. But think about it. Think about 100 years ago. There was a bunch of people like all of us. We were sitting in a room. We were called IBM. And they began to say, well, we can make this cheese slicer. We can make this scale. And we'll grow the company. I wonder what the company will be looking like in 100 years. They didn't have any idea, but they knew there was an opportunity. And they set a foundation of growth. They set a foundation of change, of transformation, of reinvention. And that's why we're doing these lectures around the world. It's because we're attempting to energize just not our own IBMers, the people that we work with day in and day out. We're trying to energize the rest of society about what is possible. This afternoon we'll go over and we will talk to all the, 180 IBMers roughly that we will have there. And we'll talk similarly. But what we'll talk about too is, what is our responsibility to the rest of society? You know, I look at all of you, I think it's very unique, is that I did not have the opportunity that you had. What do you mean? I've done very well. I have done very well in life. My dad was a printer. My mom was a tax clerk. I did not come from a lot of money. But my dad instilled in me that I needed to get a college education. If the true story, he instilled in me from a very young boy that I was going to be an electrical engineer. I didn't turn out to be an electrical engineer. I called him from college the first semester, and I said, Dad, I know you want me to be an electrical engineer, but I don't want to be an electrical engineer. Why not? I said, these people are a bunch of geeks. And I actually perhaps even coined that expression. I don't think I did, but just jokingly. The point is that he gave me an opportunity to have an education, but in many ways, my country, the United States, had already matured, it had already developed. Gave me an opportunity to help change the world. I'm going to step back for a minute, and I want you to think about 100 years from now. I want you to think about the students that are sitting in this classroom 100 years from now. And I want you to think about what they might say about what you did in the last 100 years. What's the value system that you created for your country? What's the value system that you created for your employers that you might work with? What's the value system that you created for your family? What's the foundation that you're going to lay as Croatia begins to grow and become big and more powerful. You have a rich history, but guess what? You're just like IBM in some ways. You're going through yet another transformation. You've transformed yourself over the centuries, but yet you now need to reinvent yourself in the modern world of technology and a global economy. You have that opportunity as individuals to make a difference. When I wake up every morning, and I literally do this in my own mind, I begin to think about what value can I bring to people today. And I would like to think that I'll probably meet or talk to about 500 people today. And my view of it is if I could bring value to all 500 of the people I meet today, that would be very successful. But even if I only bring value to one person, just one person out of that 500, I've made a difference for that person. That's what IBM is about. We have decided over the last 100 years and the next 100 years to make a difference. We make a difference for our clients, we make a difference for society, and we make a difference for ourselves. That, ladies and gentlemen, is strength. And one last thing about strength. It's important to identify your weaknesses, because your weaknesses can be turned into strengths. We might have made the best cheese slicer, but we recognized that that cheese slicer wasn't really going to be an opportunity to grow to the size we did. So we had a weakness in the market. We stepped back, we looked. What did we do? What do we need to do differently? You know, you can kind of capitalize on what you do well, because that's easy. It's just like, I'm sure you're in school. There's certain courses you do better at than others. My suggestion is that it probably takes a greater effort to focus on the weakness than it does the strength. Well, it's the same thing in business. It's the same thing in society. Know your weakness and create it as a strength. And that ultimately lays the foundation for an enormous future. So as I look back on IBM, we did some things very well, and we did some things very poorly. We've learned our lessons, but the 3 lessons that we've learned is that you have to pay attention to the world stage, the world economy, and how the world is evolving. That will make one part of an important definition of your future. The second thing you have to think about is how technology plays into that world economy and how you leverage technology to make society better. And the third thing we've learned that's the most important is to have a value system. A value system for the individual, collectively for our IBMers, for our families, and for society. If you have a value system, you can make very, very strong decisions. If you have a compromising value system, in the end, you will pay and you will have bad decisions. Have a level of integrity, have a level of ethic in everything you do. Because in the end, it's an evaluation of you and the people you surround yourself with. And that's why we're one of the few companies, if you think about all the companies in the world, that kind of refer to ourselves as we're an IBMer. For those of us who are IBMers, that's a proud moment, because there were hundreds of thousands of IBMers before us. And my guess is there will be hundreds of thousands of IBMers in the future. But we have that one thing in common. We work for IBM, we stand for something, and we make a difference. So with that, if you have questions for me, I'll be more than willing to answer any and all questions. And whatever you want to ask me is fine. Yes, sir.
I'd be happy to hear some of your expectations, because you talked about IBM and time cheese slicer to the future. And what do you think about here the next 10 years? What will IBM do next 10 years?
Well, I think in the next 10 years, you'll see us talk a lot about taking masses of data that already exist and analyzing it and turning it into factual data that allows us to make better decisions in the world. And the case in point would be on health. 2 examples I already gave you. I think the other thing that we will do is take masses of data to make better ethical and high integrity decisions in the financial markets. Part of the reason what happened in the early 2000s is that people did not pay attention to the data. They didn't use the data. They used their emotion. And they didn't look at the warning signs. They didn't look at the predictive analytics to fundamentally say this is what could happen. And I think what will happen now is that all of that data we'll use to predict what would be better financial decisions. I'm not going to get into the controversy or lack of controversy about you getting into the EU or not getting into the EU. I understand that you have to vote on that. My point is that perhaps there is some data that will allow you to make legitimate and appropriate decisions about how you feel about that. So I think the use of data and the use of the computers to analyze that data and then push it out to the people who need to make those decisions probably will be the trend that you see in the next 10 years for us. And I think we're going to make better decisions as a result of that. Again, because if you think about it, you know, the data that we would have had when I was your age in the 60s and the 70s, we didn't have it from all the countries. We basically had it from, you know, the Western countries in Europe and the United States. If you think about it, we have it now from all over the world. Because while there's still some level of tension on borders and the like, there's an enormous amount of data that's shared. And so the world gets smaller by using that data to make that analytic. Okay? Yes, in the back.
Thank you. You mentioned Croatia's bright future a few times. Can you tell me what, in your opinion, would be the 3 most crucial things Croatia needs to do to get to that future?
Well, I think you have to think about first what you do, what you have as an attribute. And I did some reading before I came here. I've watched your country over the last several years. I have a sense that you as a community have pride. I'm a prideful person. I'm trying to do a good job right now as I speak to you. I think that it's important to collectively, as a group of citizens, to put together that pride. It's so easy, including me, for IBM, to complain about what's wrong in IBM, or what's wrong in the United States, or what's wrong in the world. I start with what's right about Croatia. This is right about Croatia. 62,000 people in a university that's been here for 400 years or so. 4,500 engineering students of high quality thinking. That's what's right. Okay, then, now that I know what I have, my assets, what are the gaps? What do I need to do differently? I think you've got to step back and you've got to look at your economy and figure out how you industrialize it again. It was an industrialized economy at one point. It has now changed. I think that the reindustrialization, the reinventing of Croatia becomes an important part. I think you have to allow people to see what is possible. You have to create a vision for how they can get to where it will be a very better society for them. You have to create an expectation, by the way, that it's not going to be overnight. Most of us like a light switch. It's very dark, you flip on the switch, and it's light. It makes it easier. The transformation that you're about to go through is not a light switch. It takes perseverance, persistence, and a sense of conviction. Okay? I think it takes the youth to have that type of vision. I think you need to get worldly experiences. I would suggest to you that at an early age, it would be important to go out and work in countries that have already been developed, because you'll see the baseline that was created, and bring that back to your country. Learn from what others have done. You don't have to recreate the world, the wheel. You as an engineer understand that. It's circular, thank you very much. I've yet to see a wheel that's a square that works. Okay? The reality of it is go out and learn what people have already developed and come back here and apply it. I think that you have to also instill in the generations that will follow you the importance of education. Education will be a defining moment for this country. The more educated, the more literate, the more technical, the more able, the more opportunity. Education will define how this country ultimately, in my opinion, evolves. As I said, I'm a U.S. citizen, but a global executive. I happen to sit on a university board. I am concerned about the education system in the United States. It used to be one of the best. It was ranked 1 or 2. Recently, it was ranked in like number 12 or 13. Why is that happening? Well, a lot of things are happening to our education system. We're just not graduating the numbers of people that we should, and we're not encouraging the people that should be going to school to go to school. So I would say that in my mind, have a vision and make sure your society gets educated. Those are the 2 fundamentals that I would focus on. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What would be a best piece of advice to give to an engineering student about how to do well on a global job market?
Well, I think some of the best advice I can give you is to go find somebody who's already done it. I mean that sincerely, because we call them mentors. All of us in IBM have mentors. You can learn from how it's done. It makes it easier to ask the question than to guess. What you just did is a form of mentoring. You know my job, you know my experiences, and you say, I'm going to ask this guy what we can do. First of all, get your education. Don't stop your education. Get it and do it well. Have a high standard for yourself. Don't compare yourself to the worst, compare yourself to the best, because that's what we're going to do anyway. It's as simple as that, am I right? That's the way we think. We want the very best talent. We just don't want you because you graduated from this university. We want the very best. So it's important to have high standards for your education. 2, you got to have some idea of what you want to do. People like myself and the rest of my colleagues that interview you, it's not our job to figure out what you want to do. It's our job to look at your qualifications, the positions that we have available, and see if they're a match as it relates to your desires and your challenges. So you have to be able to define ultimately what you want to do. I knew what I wanted to do when I got out of graduate school. I knew that I wanted to be in human resources. I knew that by the time I was 45 to 50, that I wanted to be a senior vice president of a major corporation. Now I adjusted to that over time, but I had a plan, and I executed to that plan. So the third thing is not only have a good education, not only have a sense of what you want to do, have a plan. Recognizing, by the way, that will change over time. So maybe you do at a very young age, because I think it's advantageous, I did this myself. It's important to kind of go out and get those life experiences before some of you decide, as I did ultimately, to settle down and have a family. It's easier to move as a single person than it is as a family. It's easier to move to countries that may not be as developed as other countries like yourselves as a single person. So have the opportunity to gain those experiences early, learn from those experiences, and then ultimately kind of decide where you want to end up. And in my case, while I didn't have an international assignment, I had one, I fundamentally moved in the United States. I moved to places, trust me, that you wouldn't want to move to. In fact, I remember telling my father and mother that I was moving to Kansas. Have you ever heard of the state of Kansas? Yes. Okay, well, Kansas is real simple. It's as flat as this table. It has no trees. And it has tornadoes. That's all I remember about Kansas. But I went there because there was a plant being built, in this case, one of the most technologically advanced pharmaceutical plants. And they asked me to go out there to staff up the plant, something like 1,000 people. It was a phenomenal experience for a year and a half. I still remember what I learned there, and I apply it today. So I think the idea of having the education, having a vision, and having a plan, be flexible with it, but kind of stay, and then periodically reevaluate if the plan works. Be flexible enough to say, I thought I was going this way, but I might have to go that way. But last but not least, 2 pieces of advice. Find a mentor. I'll tell you a story about a mentor to close that one. And be true to yourself. Know what you want. I had a mentor by the name of Chuck Fleming. He's no longer on the face of this earth. He was an older man, but he was a very wise man. And I was maybe 26, and it was Christmas, just before Christmas holiday. And I was going to have lunch with him, and we were going to go through everything I did for the year, and he was going to tell me as a mentor how I did. So the night before, I wrote this speech out, and I memorized it, all the things that I did, and I told my wife, should I wear this suit, this tie, how about these shoes? We had it all figured out. Went to lunch with him. I looked at him and I said, Chuck, here's what I did. I did this, 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 I did this. Boy, I was impressed. I was really impressed with myself. And he looked at me and he said, did you really? You're a failure. Excuse me? Obviously, he didn't hear me. Chuck, let me go through it again. I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. He stopped me halfway through. He said, oh, no. He said, I agree that you did all those things, but you're still a failure. Shook my head and I said, I don't understand why. He said, Randy, you're a very smart man, and you get things done. But guess what? You don't get them done through other people. You do it yourself. You need to learn how to collaborate. You need to learn how to team. You need to learn how to lead. You're leaving everybody behind. And as a leader, they don't want to follow. And the worst thing you can do as a leader is have people who are not behind you. And that is something that I have never forgotten. I'm 62 years old. He said that to me when I was 26 years of age. And I still remember it to this day. The power of a mentor to give you advice and for you to listen. And that's a skill that a lot of human beings don't have. Especially one of us when we all go to universities, because suddenly we're the smartest people in the world. I think one of the greatest skills in life is the ability to listen. And I listened to him, and I think it made a difference. So I'd suggest you think about getting a mentor as well. Other questions? Anything else? Yes, sir.
Just a short one. You were talking about sharing ideas and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of sharing ideas. In fact, I think some of my colleagues probably have one of the best ideas in the world.
You're not from Croatia, though, are you?
I am.
Are you? You have a different accent.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So, anyhow, yeah. Now, I just kind of have this. So you were talking about IBM having different core values, which is great, and I think sharing ideas is great. But for example, in Croatia, we have this. Well, I would call it a problem. People are basically afraid to ask questions, and people are afraid to share ideas. Mm-hmm. So how do you get those people to share ideas with you? An example, I had a presentation a couple months ago, and I said something which I knew probably half people there don't know what that means. No one asked me what that means. And I had my girlfriend sit in the middle row, and she said, you know, people were asking around, what does that mean? You know, but no one actually asked me, so what does that mean?
Well, you know, I'll give you another learning experience. And Mindy and a few people heard me tell this story yesterday. I'm a storyteller because I learned from my experiences. It is difficult for humans, just like it is right now. 4 or 5 of you have asked questions. Let me tell you a little bit about human nature and my background and what I've studied. Most of the time, when I ask who wants the next question, the vast majority of you, who are now, by the way, making eye contact with me, all of you are basically making eye contact with me right now. As soon as I say, who wants the next question, you know what happens to the eyes? They go down. It's human nature. People are naturally resistant to worrying about rejection and embarrassment. And I think it takes a more mature person to be able to question. And I think I love, and my team, 2 of my team members who've worked with me very closely know this, I would prefer you to challenge me than to tell me that I'm right. It forces me to think. Forces me to think why you're challenging me. But you say to me, well, okay, I get it, Randy, but how do you do that? You've got to create a climate. You've got to allow people in. You've got to allow people to understand that it's okay to challenge. When I was your age, I'd be sitting in a room not unlike you, taking a course from a professor like this gentleman here, and he would be saying something and he'd ask a question out loud. And I had the instantaneous answer. There's no doubt in my mind that I had the answer. But I was like a lot of you. I kept it to myself. Why? I was afraid it was wrong. I was afraid I'd be laughed at. I was afraid it would be dismissed. And then, like, 20 minutes later, after this professor kind of pulled it out of somebody and got the right answer, I thought to myself, that person just got credit for giving the right answer that I knew 20 minutes ago. You've got to have some level of courage to question. If you look at leaders who have changed the people on the face of this earth, they had one fundamental concept. They questioned why. In the United States, in 1954, 54 or 64, I can't remember, 54, there was a woman, a black woman, by the name of Rosa Parks. She got on a bus. She was supposed to go sit in the back. They told her, go back to the back of the bus because you sat in the front. And she said, why? And guess what? That why changed how we think about race in the United States. She had the courage of her conviction. We had somewhat of a culture in the United States that realized that that behavior of one individual versus another was inappropriate. Now, it took us about 20 years to ultimately fix it. That goes back to transformation is not fast. So I think you've got to create a climate. You've got to help people, encourage people. So nobody questioned you that day, right?
Yeah.
Why did you turn around and say to people, why aren't you questioning me?
I did.
Did you?
Yeah.
And what did they do?
Nothing. I just find it fascinating.
It's tough. I mean, in the spirit of honesty, as I stand before you today, there's a part of me that's still guarded because I don't want to offend you. I don't know all of your culture. I don't know all of your history. So, as much as I want to give you an honest answer, I'm a human being. And I worry that I might make I remember when you were not just Croatia, you were a larger country. So I know that, I studied that as a young man, okay? Now how do I deal with that? If somebody brings that up and I don't understand, what do I do? What I would tell you is I don't understand. That's where maturity comes in. I think that, of course my wife would not suggest that I'm mature yet, but that's a different story. I've been married to her for 37 years and She calls me a work in progress. But the fact that she uses the word progress means that we're doing okay. I just think you just gotta keep at it. And you just gotta keep saying, the next class that somebody didn't challenge you, why not? Eventually you ask the question enough, people will get the message. Last question. Is there a last question? Well, you already asked one. Is there any other one before that? As the eyes go down. Okay.
I would just like to comment something. You said, you told us that the IBM started with the cheese slicing machine.
Yep.
And it was called IBM, but something is just not right. I mean, International Cheese Slicing Machine.
Well, actually, it helped me, her horse from Mindy. It was actually started as CTR. Computing, tabulating, recorders. That didn't work either as a cheese slicer. You know, as businesses started, they basically created a product before they gave it a name. And that's what you're really experiencing 100 years from now, 100 years back. So they started with that. It was a foundation, it was a building, it was a bunch of people. And they started with that concept, and then they just began to grow from there. So no, I never thought of, that's a good thought. International Cheese Machines, ICM. I hadn't thought about that, to do that. Listen, I enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful. Sorry?
Can we have one more question?
One more, sure. Hey, I have to go to Rome at 5:30 tonight. So we can stay here at 5:30 if you want.
Just to give.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I'm interested in understanding how you talked a lot about your core ethics and values, how you maintain and manage that in a world that may have different, you know, a bride, like you said, in America may be different than it is in China.
Yeah, I understand. What did I do here today? I drove that point home repeatedly with you. I want you to walk out of here thinking a lot about IBM, but the fact that, see, this is an example where she's questioning, how do you do that now? But the bottom line is, it made an imprint on your mind. I want people to get that into their DNA about IBM. Well, if you go to work for IBM, you better have some level of integrity ethic, because they don't tolerate anything less than that. I can go over with you several ways to do it. First and foremost is, you know, you walk the talk as leaders. You know, I am constantly being assessed as I go around the world. How do I behave? What do I do? What are the things that I say? People make judgments about the leadership of a corporation based on how I act. In fact, to be honest with you, when I got out of the car this morning, I thought to myself, should I have brought a gift to the dean? And because in China, that's what you would do. Okay? And I thought to myself, probably not, because nobody told me that that was the culture. Now, somebody could have assumed that by bringing a gift to the dean, I was making a statement about, I only want the best talent for IBM. So you have to think through your actions. But leadership is very, very important at the top. Two, when you see something that's wrong, you have to deal with it immediately. You know, for some of us who have been blessed with children, and now I have 2 grandsons that I'm enormously proud of, you know, they don't do everything right. You know, they're good kids, but they don't do everything right. And what do? You have to take them aside and you have to explain the difference between right and wrong. Because guess what? If you don't, they'll continue to do it. The same is true in business. What was a gift in China was a bribe in the United States. You have to sit down with people and explain to them, that is not the way this company thinks. That is not our ethic, that is not our value. If I explain that to you, and you continue to do that, then you have to deal with it more harshly. See, to me, I once said, I warn children, I don't warn adults. Think about it. Adults should know better. Now, if you don't know better because you're not attuned to the way business works, then it's my obligation to teach you. But once I teach you, and you don't subscribe to that belief, then you're not an IBMer. See, in order to be able to walk around and say I'm an IBMer, there's there's a mantra, if you will, around what that means. And it means somebody like me has to be honest and forthright. You just have to build it into the DNA. It's not something that you can engineer. It's not something that you can do 2 + 2 = 4. It's a value system. It's a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of doing business. And it's just accepted. And if you don't accept it, then you don't fit. That may seem harsh, but that's the way we think. You don't fit. You don't have the right to be called an IBMer if you don't want to have a level of integrity and ethic. Now, if you think about all the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who work for us, if all of them have done it right, no. There have been examples where it has not worked, but they tend to be few and far between. We tend to weed it out pretty fast because the system works. Just like a social gathering. If you go to a party and you're invited, but you seem to do some things that are contrary to the rest of the behavior, what happens? The social system discounts you. It pushes you out. It's the same thing in business. The social system will push you out, unless the social system doesn't have integrity. And then you can thrive until you get caught. Now can I go? I will say it again. I was honored. You know, there's certain things, I grew up in upstate New York. I said my dad was a printer, my mom was a tax clerk, and if you ever said to me as a young boy, 12, or a young man at 22, someday you would be in front of a bunch of students in Croatia, I would say, you don't know what you're talking about. There's no way. So see, to me, it's more my honor to be here. It's more of a treat for me. It's one of those things that when I ultimately retire, I will remember.